Welcome to Norse Code, I guess a podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, given recent revelations. I am your host with the mostest, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me is our customary in-house analyst and Vikings blogger extraordinaire, useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Doing well, despite what seems to be a bit of an inferiority issue for you.
Inferiority?
I mean, that's what it seems like when you introduce, like, it's a Minnesota Vikings podcast. No, it's the number one Minnesota Vikings podcast.
That's true. We never clearly established criteria for what makes us number one, so...
Yeah, it's because we're the best.
Norse Code is and does remain the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, and one of the reasons we are that is the quality of guests that we get on the show every week. Joining us after a mere 6 episodes to, bookend our draft is Matt Harmon. What's up, Matt? How you doing?
Yeah, what's going on, guys? It's good to be back talking with you again. I don't know. I can definitively say that you guys are my favorite Vikings podcast that I've ever been on. So there's that. If that helps the cause, and yeah, definitely coming to you from completely different circumstances than last time. I'm staying in a hotel right now in Arkansas, which, by the way, is a dry county. Found that out after I booked the hotel, and I'm upset about that because I was really looking forward to a beer. So there's
dry counties exist, man. That's so awful.
I didn't even know they existed in the year 2016. I was shocked.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked to find out that was still a thing. I mean, I guess I figured, like, intuitively maybe there was, but I was not expecting this. So it was a shocking revelation.
Man, so a man in a dry county in a hotel room with just a laptop and a dog. That's like it's like a Merle Haggard song.
I know. It definitely has the makings of a good country song. I guess I'm just going to work out tonight instead of drink, which is a start.
Oh, that's also a very country, like, I guess I'll work out instead of drink today. It's very... You're in a good spot. Bad spot for you. Good spot.
Yeah, right. If only my wife had left me recently, which she has not. And I'm also not married, so this whole story.
So maybe the analogy doesn't stand up to that much scrutiny.
But we're getting close. It's close.
Yeah.
So we'll get to all that in just a moment. But I did want to take a moment and thank some of our listeners. Well, I'd like to thank all of our listeners first. You guys are the prime movers of this operation. The reason we show up once a week and twice a week during the season now to talk Vikings with a cross-section of the very best from the internet in terms of analysis and commentary. So thank you to everyone, but specifically, thank you to these 3 wonderful humans who have contributed to the show over the last week. Zachary Smith sends in Tree Fitty via PayPal e-check, which I did not know still existed. He includes a note, "For all the amazing and insightful information on the Minnesota Vikings, great to have it. Thanks." No, Zachary, thank you. Your Tree Fitty makes it possible for us to keep doing.
Also, thank you for reminding us the existence of e-checks. It cleared, by the way, so fantastic.
All right, Tree Fitty in the account. Thank you very much. Next, Joe Rigel donates $5 a month by Patreon, the preferred method of supporting the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. He writes, "I'm a huge lifelong Vikings fan from Massachusetts. Patriots fans can be pretty obnoxious. Well, ain't that the truth? Love the podcast, been listening for a few months now. So much better than national sports radio or local Patriots Homer radio. Keep it coming, guys. #Skull."
I mean, hopefully we're better than almost every local radio. I find, although now I'm pseudo-employed by local radio, I'm still going to say this local radio tends to suck. So I hope we're better than almost all the local radio.
I am not a big fan of a lot of the sports talk that happens on the radio around here, and after being exposed to it for years, just through like friends and work and stuff, I resolved when I started making this show to do something different from that and hopefully better. And it sounds like we're doing it. So thanks for the kind words, and especially the money, Joe. We really appreciate that.
Especially that.
Kurt Sterling contributes $3 a month via Patreon as well. Thank you, Kurt. That's the best thing you could have done for us. And he writes, okay, so I've been listening to the show since partway through season 1. I'm a lifelong Vikings fan. While the show is straight up goofy and off topic at times, I thoroughly enjoy it each week. Keep it up, guys. Side note, I live in Pittsburgh and don't root for the Steelers. Sinning/blasphemy, apparently. Dusty, you better say my name on air. I will do that, Kurt Sterling. Thanks for sponsoring the show. Arif, keep being useful. James who? I thought this was a 2-man podcast. JK, #skull.
Fantastic. Thanks for the note, Kurt.
Always good to hear. Feel free to become a member of Norse Code. We have 20 sustaining members of the show. That's amazing. Frankly, at the beginning, I would have been impressed if 20 people had even listened to the show. So if you would like to be number 21 or 30 or whatever number we get to by the time we receive your contribution, go to patreon.com/NorseCode and become a recurring sponsor of the show today. If you only want to give us $3.50 in e-check or Visa or any other format that PayPal accepts, go to paypal.me/NorseCode and flip us a few bucks if you think that what we're doing is worth keeping around. Now then, on to the show. What has changed in the last 6 weeks in the NFL world? I mean, I feel like it's been kind of a sleepy time for media. Can't think of a single event
that has occurred in that intermediary period. Not a single one.
Well, I guess other than the draft, if we're going to be like super technical about it, I mean, there was maybe one thing that happened.
Wait, what's the draft?
Describe to me this draft.
So I guess the Senate finally passed, a reinstatement of the military draft. You're up, by the way. You qualify.
Oh damn! That's right. I'm actually gonna fake my own death in this hotel room in that case and run off into the distance. Since I'm already on the road anyways, I feel like I'm already prepared to survive like one more day.
You're already in Arkansas. Why not just finish falling off the grid?
Yeah, pretty much already there, guys. I've the past 3 days I've eaten pretty much only granola, apples, and turkey jerky because no beef. Because I'm #fit Twitter. It's been an experience. Because though I'm on the road,
I can't imagine road tripping and like trying to like watch what I eat. That sounds awful.
It's been like I said, it's been an interesting experience, but I'm all about staying in shape and it's important. So I don't know. You're right. It's been hard though. I'm always driving past some kind of fast food place. I'm like, man, if this was 3 years ago, I'd be all over that. But hey, here I am.
So how many miles is this road trip total?
Like from LA to Virginia, it's like 3,000 miles or maybe a little bit less. It's somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. I was going to set
pretty large range there.
I was going to set the mile counter on my car, but then I forgot. So I don't know. I can't tell you exactly, but most, this is the only night I'm staying in a hotel, obviously because Arif kept twisting my arm to do the podcast. No, but seriously, actually just to edit my own podcast that I've already recorded and be able to upload it tomorrow morning. So, but other than that, I've been, staying outside in like state parks and stuff and in a tent. So this is, I don't know how many miles it's been. I actually don't really know anything anymore. I think I've completely lost touch with reality. So we'll see how this podcast goes.
That's pretty great. So we talked a little bit about your background a couple of times, especially last time on the show, but let's talk about your podcast for a second. It's not like our podcast. It's not like a football podcast. It's a little bit different. Can you describe it?
Sure. So it's called the Back Yard Banter podcast, available on my website and also at SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, all that good stuff. What I'm doing is
good
going.
Podcast.
Yeah, right. You got to go through all the ads there.
Right.
So really the goal of it is to kind of help people that are trying to get a start in this business, covering football at whatever level that they want, help them break in. So what I've been doing is going through a wide range of analysts, whether they're fantasy analysts or just straight regular NFL writers. I had Jess Kleinschmidt on last time. She writes a lot about baseball, so that got pretty antagonistic, but because I don't like baseball. But yeah, I've been just trying to get a wide range of people. And
you don't like boring sports? Oh man,
baseball doesn't need you to like it. All right, baseball is just fine without you.
Sorry. Listen, I'm not. I was totally a jerk about it when I had Jess on my podcast because it was my podcast. But I try to be very polite, and I don't want to mess with baseball if you're into it when I'm on your podcast. That feels rude, but it is terrible. So what the podcast is I'm just going through and like interviewing these people, trying to figure out how they got started in order to kind of help other people. Because, when I was coming up, which is not that long ago, I was really just like, I don't know what to do other than just to do it. But I would have kind of really enjoyed as an aspiring writer, like some sort of resource, to be able to have like that guide. And I think it's been really helpful for that. I've had people, reach out to me about that. But even more importantly, I've had listeners reach out and say that it's just, even if they don't care about becoming a football writer or even care about football in general, people just like to listen to stories and listen to people talk. And that's what I've found really the most enjoyable thing is that, one, people are actually listening, which is always, as you mentioned, is always a surprise. But the fact that people find it inspiring for other things other than just how to become a football writer, I'm really happy with what's happened so far. I'll be uploading the 20th episode. Arif, I definitely would love to have you on at some point. There's just so many people to talk to, man. It's crazy. I actually have a spreadsheet with potential guests like sorted out. That's
way more organized than we are.
Well, I have an incredibly dorky, stupid brain, and that's what that's what it told me to do. So it's been a great experience so far, and I'm really thankful that everybody continues to tune in.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Obviously, I would love to be on your podcast. Whenever you deign to have me on, I'll see if I can make some time for you, pencil you in. But this is theoretically a Vikings podcast, so on to talking about the Vikings. Before we, go into any like specifics or anything like that, like who they drafted and what they do. What were your impressions, sort of in general, of the Vikings draft? If you like paid attention or at least sideways familiar with it.
Yeah, I liked what the Vikings did. I liked that they moved around a little bit. I loved their first pick, which I know we're going to talk plenty about.
Yeah,
I think that might be the reason I'm here. I don't know, but I think they had several really good selections, which is great. I think that the last few years they've really shown to be one of those front offices that has a sense of their team identity and also just like an overall clarity of their organization and a clear. It seems like they have a clear plan every time they go into the draft. And I think this was another really good year for them. Also, they caused the NFL Network crew to crack up when they took Willie Beavers. So that was great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I loved their first two picks were great with Treadwell and Alexander. And I thought they took some interesting guys after that too. So it was good. It was a good group for me.
Well, the guy that has drawn the most media coverage was not the first round pick, not the amazing story of the guy who was picked in the second round. In fact, a sixth round pick, also a person that sent the NFL Network into conniptions, I guess. It's a Moritz Boehringer. And so, obviously there's a lot of intrigue that comes with the player that has not played football in the United States, I think, at all. There's a lot of questions about, his skill set and his athleticism and yada, yada, yada. But I think, so the most important question, Dusty brought this up, he has to have a nickname, right? What do you think? And Dusty, obviously, he's got some strong opinions. What do you think his nickname should be? Because the NFL Network's nickname, Mobo, seems kind of meh, right?
I think he said he didn't like that, or
did he?
I've heard from a few places that I think I remember someone saying recently that he didn't like that nickname, or maybe he even said it publicly that he didn't like it or something. But yeah, I'll tell you what, the coverage of Mr. Boehringer has been exhausting from my own network. I had plenty of people ask me, are you going to do any work on Boehringer? I'm like, where the hell did this guy come from?
Kind of work.
Yeah, right. I know. I was like, listen, I have, a wide array of college film, more than anybody else does, due to working with the NFL. There is no tab where you open up in our database and it just shows the German indoor football league or whatever. So, but no, so Mobo definitely is out. If he doesn't, I very, very strongly believe you cannot make somebody have a nickname if they don't like it. So I think that one's off the table.
See, actually, I always thought the first rule of nicknames was that if someone gives you a nickname and you are visibly distressed by it, then that immediately becomes your nickname.
Yeah, now that's
good. Among your friends, that's true. I think publicly, maybe that's less true.
Yeah, I think Arif is right about that. That's a good way of saying it. There's a joke at the NFL media office, or really just on the fantasy team, that I'm from West Virginia, and I'm not, and because I get so upset
How
about
is that a joke?
No, it's not. It's not true. I am not from West Virginia. Because I get so upset about it, I can't just steer into the current on this one. Every other thing I can, but this was the one thing. Now everybody says that, and listeners of the Fantasy Live podcast will take pictures of West Virginia things and send them to me. I'm like, get out of here. This is terrible. So, but yeah, public. So I'm definitely on team publicly. No, cannot have a nickname that you don't like. I kind of like calling him, the Unicorn, because his team was the Unicorns, over there in Germany. I kind of like that. Although I did write an article called Kyrus Garrett, the Unicorn of the draft.
Yeah, man, that was really disappointing when I saw that article come out. Sigmund Bloom corrected you pretty quickly, though.
Yeah, that is true. But I think that article came out before we even knew that Moritz existed on planet Earth. So I'm going to claim amnesty on that one. But I like that though. And Kyrus Garrett he can have a new nickname. He's just good. He could just be called Key. I like that.
That's really good actually. Yeah.
So we get to go with Key. I like Unicorn for Moritz.
Oh, that's good. Dusty also had a Futurama-related nickname, right?
Well, I am enthusiastic about the Ringer as a possibility, but
that's good.
I like that too. Yeah,
he's got a ways to go before he can really before he can own that. He actually has to perform like a Ringer would in a game, I think, before we can call him that. Otherwise, Morbo, of course, the news monster from Futurama, is a favorite bit character of mine in any TV series. And I like the little spin on apparently the now panned Mobo, which never really made any sense to me. That's just clumsy nickname making.
Yeah, that's not even trying. That's not even trying. Yeah, you make a good point though about he has to do something before he gets a nickname. Are we just what if he doesn't make the team? What if he gets cut?
He's almost assuredly not going to make the team, but with that in mind, I think that some nicknames can work if you don't perform, and some nicknames require you to perform. And I think the Ringer's one of them, or the Natural or whatever. The Unicorn, I think, works kind of regardless. I like Morbo, but he has to demonstrate some monstrous qualities or something like that. So if he ends up being this dominant blocker like Treadwell or something like that, I'm Morbo, I'm totally fine with. But I think that he has to assert himself, at least in camp, before that happens.
He has a monstrous farmer's tan. Let me tell you that. In those pictures. And I say this, and listen, and I say this as somebody that has probably just as bad of a farmer's tan as he does, because I do a lot of hiking and running, and I, don't just pop my shirt off randomly around my neighborhood. So I have a pretty bad one too. So this is brother to brother on this one with me and him. That's the only monstrous. That's really the only monstrous quality he's got going on for him right now.
He will fit in very well.
You're just dropping all kinds of pseudo humble brags on the podcast, man.
Listen,
eating fit, eating out.
You guys are the only humans I've talked to for the last 2 days.
That's probably a good thing given sort of the state of Twitter the last 2 days. So you're probably in a good spot.
Oh no, you'll have to catch me up. I need blow by blow account of all the drama.
Nah, we'll get to that later, man.
So if we're gonna give Moritz a name that is I guess commensurate with his performance or likely performance in training camp, it would probably be Moritz better luck next year injured.
Jesus. I mean, talk about clunky nicknames, but that is potentially one of them.
I think it accurately will mirror his performance as like one step below rookie in the NFL.
Yikes.
It might. This is a good question. So obviously Treadwell is going to be a longer discussion, or at least hopefully it will be. We've gone on this one pretty long. But Matt, I think you're a little bit more familiar with like sort of the challenges it takes to be, a good receiver. I know like in your Treadwell article, you talk about how, speed is one of the most overrated aspects of a receiver. And, how can it not be given the coverage that we give the 40-yard dash? But like, what are the challenges for Boehringer to even like sort of make the practice squad? I mean, we know about players, like Jimmy Graham or Antonio Gates. And the reason we remember them actually is because the story is so unique that it is very rare. It is possible, right, that a player with very little or not relevant football experience makes a practice squad or, God forbid, a roster. What are the challenges, do you think, for this guy that you're probably already sick of talking about?
Well, yeah, amen to that last point, but not even really talking about, just sick of being asked about on Twitter mostly, but because the answer is like, I don't know. But
right.
I think one of the struggles of that he's going to face and of even just college players in general, and it's only a greater degree for him, is that when you are such a superior athlete, which he clearly is, he demonstrated that in a very measured form, you have to relearn to not just consistently rely on that athleticism. And the jump from players from college to the NFL level is already so extreme. And I mean, I have seen some of the clips of him. Like, I've not sat down and charted all of his routes or anything, but I mean, I've seen him play, seen some of his highlights and stuff like that. Some of those defenders that he's going against, they don't even really have a clue of what they're doing.
Right.
And you can clearly see he's just playing at a different speed from them. That's something that a guy like that's an adjustment that a player like Devontae Parker, who has a much greater pedigree. I mean, he's a first round pick in the NFL. He faced a big steep jump from, his final year in college to the NFL, not being able to just out athlete somebody. It's just a greater degree for a player like Boehringer. And so he, like, not only does he have to just relearn technique and timing and all that sort of stuff that goes into it, it's going to be at a greater degree of difficulty than any other rookie faces. And not to mention, I think this is something that probably doesn't get talked about enough, and this is not necessarily an on-field thing, but he's going to have to adjust to like a whole different lifestyle too, because not only has he become incredibly popular very quickly, thanks a lot NFL Network. Don't fire me though. Do whatever you want. But he's going to have to face because of all that attention, he's going to be coming from another country. He has a lot going on. It's a big, steep learning curve, both from an off-field and on-field perspective, and it's a lot to ask of a guy.
Right. No, actually, this sort of off-field transition is something that I don't think it's talked about enough because we don't. I mean, it's not a consistent issue for fans of the NFL. I know that this has been an issue. If you're a fan of soccer, I know that you tend to follow a little bit of soccer at least, or at least you look like you do. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm literate in soccer. Like I can
sure.
I can go to a bar and fake know about soccer.
Oh, okay, that's really all we needed. But so this is I was a couple years ago I read a book called Soccernomics. It's a pretty good book. Like most books with those kind of kitschy titles, it's a little bit overconfident in its conclusions. But one thing that they brought up was that at the time of the publishing, one of the only clubs in the world. Actually, there's two clubs, and they happen to be in the same league. But one of the only clubs in the world that looked at player acquisition as an additional challenge instead of an additional opportunity was like AC Milan. Just kind of weird. They've got a bunch of international players. They got players from Brazil. They got players from France, from Germany, England, obviously, and North Africa. And clubs did not try to or even think about situating players. So you got a player from, say from Nigeria, right? He may speak French. He probably speaks English, but he doesn't speak Italian. Almost everybody on the team speaks Italian. Your manager speaks Italian. Your manager may not even speak English. And if they do speak English, it'll be a very different English. And no one really accounted for that. And, he has no place to go. He has no place to unwind. He doesn't know what food to eat. He doesn't know how to order food at a restaurant. He has no friends, no family, no community that he can talk to. He's left alone and isolated. So what AC Milan and Inter Milan too, actually, big rivals, is that they have people on staff whose sole job it is to situate these foreign players in a foreign country. They contact real estate agents and find homes for these players that are within communities that they can become familiar with. They teach them basic life skills and stuff like that. And, that's something that we didn't see, in the top level of the Spanish leagues, the top level of the English leagues, the German leagues. But they kept on acquiring these foreign players, and their foreign players kept on burning out at a rate higher than the ones for AC Milan and Inter Milan. And that's a common problem in soccer. They've begun to tackle it, but that's not a problem that we've seen, in the NFL. And it's not like he's not going to have a support system here in the United States. But at the same time, we don't know if the support system is going to be well situated for maybe what he actually needs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to track. I mean, it's already crazy for some of these college players in the transition that they have to go through.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even imagine like going through that. I'm 24 years old now, like 2 years ago, having to jump from, college to then like, I'm an NFL player. I'm a professional now. I have all this money and attention and all that sort of stuff. It's a lot for a young person. I don't know how old, Unicorn is. But
22.
But it's okay. So yeah, that's a lot for a 22-year-old to go through. And, these are the things that we don't really talk about enough from a player development perspective. But it's huge because it's literally the development of human beings. And if you want them to succeed in a professional sense, they have to succeed in a personal sense. And it's a lot on the Vikings to make sure that happens for this guy.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see, sort of what happens there. An interesting note, not really super relevant to what we were just talking about, but relevant to what we were talking about earlier. So I looked up the weights of not the defensive backs, but the linebackers of players on his own team. Maybe it's an unusually light team, but the players on his own team, the linebackers ranged in weight from 190 pounds to 230 pounds. He himself weighs 227. Yeah, right. He himself weighs 227. One of the linebackers is heavier than him. So the degree of his transition to NFL players who, I think, based on what we saw, relish contact a little bit more too. The transition from the German league, the NFL, it sounds like it's going to be a lot, right?
Yeah, and I was listening to the draft break because I've listened to about 1,000 podcasts the last week or so, or last few days, and I was listening to the Draft Breakdown podcast, and Justin Higdon pointed this out that he wasn't even the most productive receiver on his own team from a raw.
No, the Packers signed that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I really do, and I never want to suspect things like this, but it's very real. I really do wonder if this was all just kind of one big PR move by the Vikings. And I don't know what the motivation for that would be, other than, hey, let's just get some more eyes on our team or whatever, because clearly the NFL Network and ESPN is going to follow them. I don't know. It's just an odd situation, and I mean it's definitely worth a look. I mean, he should be in an NFL camp, sure, because what do you got to lose? But and it's stupid to nitpick a 6th-round pick too. But it's a huge jump, and I like that cannot be overstated enough.
So what's interesting is, so I thought it might be for a little bit, and the reason I think that it might not actually be just a PR stunt. And again, it's not like I'm a homer defending my team, making a bunch of great picks. We'll get into some of the picks I disagreed with in a bit, but if the Vikings were going to take him, it sounds like Atlanta actually was going to take him and convert him to a tight end. And there was at least 2 other teams who were genuinely interested in drafting him, not just bringing him in as a priority free agent, but actually drafting him and spending draft capital, which you're right. I mean, you don't necessarily want to nitpick like a 6th round or 7th round pick, but draft capital is way different than like an undrafted free agent signing. So, but they did invest something in him. And if they didn't, someone else was going to. So I don't necessarily think it's a PR stunt. But I'm confident that wasn't absent from their minds. But it sounds like this was the investment they needed to make if they wanted to get him. And I guess they really wanted to get him.
Yeah, no doubt. I can't criticize. Like I said, I'm not going to criticize the 6th round pick too much.
Right. You want to get into too much, yeah.
Right.
Well, let's talk about someone who will almost assuredly start and will definitely see the field for the Vikings, barring like injury or something awful. Laquan Treadwell. He is as polarizing, I think, as you can kind of be in this receiver draft. Will Fuller aside, which is not that polarizing. I think he's not, but there's been some pretty healthy disagreement about Laquan Treadwell, and a lot of this has to do with some of the differences between. So you could call them tape watchers and analytics guys, although I think the analytics guys are actually very torn on him too. Just like the idea that you necessarily maybe want more physically dominant athletes, which I think he's physically dominant, but he didn't destroy the test or anything like that. He's a lot of ink has been spilled over him more than, Corey Coleman, who is just a highlight reel. So you'd think you'd see a little bit more about him, or Michael Thomas, either Michael Thomas, obviously, or even Will Fuller, who's more polarizing, or Josh Doxson, who, a lot of people had as the number 1 receiver. So this is a guy a lot of people disagree about, and have talked a lot about their disagreement. You're clearly sort of on one side of this. Can you talk about what you really like about Laquan Treadwell and what concerns you've seen that are not concerns to you?
Yeah, I like almost everything about Laquan Treadwell, and I was actually kind of so inspired by some of the debates about him, that I went out and just wrote a piece about him right before the draft. And he's someone that, we've known for a long time that he was going to be a top prospect. Like there are some of those guys that like we've heard the hype for years, and he was that guy. He was a high level recruit, and then he was very hyped the year that he tore up his knee or ankle or whatever the injury was. I can't remember off the top of my head. There was a lot of hype about him. Like he was getting the Dez Bryant comparisons then, and then he obviously misses the rest of that season. He comes back this year and has a pretty solid year. And all this while, during this final season, I'm charting his reception perception, during the season when there hasn't been all these critiques of him just yet. And he's checking all the boxes for me. So his scores are good in reception perception. I like everything that I see. And then when the criticism comes out during the offseason, it was just very strange to me because a lot of it I felt just wasn't founded. And I do think that there is something to be said about when we know a guy's going to be good for a long time. And I mentioned this in the article that I think naturally we just start to look for flaws and necessarily don't continue to highlight the things like the very nuanced detail aspects of the position. And I see this a lot, and I do it myself, or at least I used to. When I already know that a prospect is a big, physically dominant receiver, which I definitely think you can see that Treadwell plays that way, you don't necessarily go in and look for, okay, how detailed of a route runner is he? Does he sell routes? Is he a technician? And I think that then when you forget about that, you forget that that's a major positive. And I think that is a very positive thing for Treadwell. I think he's a technically detailed guy. At a very young age too, when he missed a whole chunk of his college career. So I think that's very promising. To me, like I said, I think he separates well, and I think that there is something to be said for separation for one player is not separation for another. I think that there is some subjectivity to that, which is why I don't think you can go in and I don't know how other people are doing it, but I don't think you can say separation for this player should be measured the same as this one or clearly defined, because it's just not a clearly defined thing. It's it's different for every player. And I think that he shows more than enough separation for the type of player that he is to be a passable prospect. I mean, he has a top 5 score in success rate versus man coverage and above average score against press. And so I think, and this is in reception perception, so I think that he is definitely good enough in that regard. And then you look at other aspects of his game. I think he is aggressive after the catch. It's something that I think that's another thing that people gloss over sometimes, is just how phenomenal he is with the ball in his hands, because you don't necessarily think of a big, quote unquote possession receiver to be that way, but he definitely is. We know he can play the ball well in the air. So for me, I feel like there's no fatal flaw with him. That I think that he has a very safe floor, and I think the Vikings will get a lot out of that safe floor. But I still think he has a high ceiling if he continues to develop technically, if he just, further goes along, maybe gaining more short area quickness, which I think you can do, whether that's through technique in stopping and starting, or what have you. I think that there's plenty can be done with that. And Charlie's chiming in and agreeing with me, I hope.
It's good to get Charlie's approval. So I know that Treadwell isn't, I think anyway, that Treadwell isn't the best technical route runner in the class according to you. That's probably, like Sterling Shepard or even Hollywood Higgins or somebody. But he's not the most technical receiver, but he is probably in your top 3 or top 5, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I've said all along that Sterling Shepard is the best route runner in this class, no question. Right. And then it's everybody else. I think Tyler Boyd is actually a good route runner. The problem is he's a good route runner. He's a good route runner, and he doesn't get requisite separation. So what is being a good route runner?
He doesn't do much with the skills that he's acquired, at least when you turn it into like projecting to the NFL level.
Correct. But yeah, I would say Treadwell is definitely top 3 or 5.
So if Sterling Shepard is the best route runner in the class, and he's just a more athletic prospect, not that Sterling Shepard is like, Deshaun Jackson or anything like that, but he's a more athletic prospect. He's a better route runner. What separates Treadwell from Shepard? Is it just size? Is it the ability to use that size? Is it like what's the reason that you would have, if you would have Treadwell above Shepard if Shepard is both a better route runner and a better athlete?
That is a very good question. And for clarity's sake, I try to avoid rankings whenever, unless someone that's paying me asks me to do it, then I'll rank whatever you want.
So imagine you have Treadwell ranked higher. Defend this imaginary.
I was gonna say I at least have them in my head, like a preference wise. And because people have asked me that pay me have asked me to have these rankings at least formulated in my brain. And it would go, Treadwell would be 1, Doxton, Shepard, Coleman. Those were the 4 that I knew for sure. So I do have Treadwell 1 ahead of Shepard. And I think that size plays a factor. I think he is better after the catch than Shepard is. He fits that archetype that you look for in your number 1 X receiver. And I think that Sterling Shepard, we've seen guys of his build and physicality become X receivers, become number 1s. We're talking about Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham. They've set the bar really, really high. And I think that Shepard has worked, as much as I love him. And, clearly if you've been following me, I do. As much as I love him, I think he still has work to do to go along that small number 1 receiver archetype, especially in terms of winning the ball in the air. In Treadwell, that's one of his best traits. So I think that there's enough, periphery differences to separate the two.
Sure. So I think that Michael Thomas is a great route runner. I think he's one of the top route runners in the class. He's a little bit more athletic. He's underrated after the catch. What to you separates Michael Thomas, who's not in your top 4, from Laquan Treadwell? I mean, they're the same size. Is it because Treadwell's just more obviously a bigger and better bully? Or do you think he's even better after the catch than Thomas? Do you think that he does a better job with the contested catches? Is he a more natural catcher? What separates Treadwell so far from Thomas, who, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you disagree with me about how good of a route runner Michael Thomas is, but what separates Treadwell from Michael Thomas, that Michael Thomas isn't even in your top 4 and Treadwell's sort of at the top of that?
Yeah, I think that you're right in saying that he is a very good route runner, and I like a lot of what you see. Michael Thomas is such an interesting prospect, and I would actually, you mentioned polarizing guys up top. I think he was actually probably one of the more polarizing.
Yeah, he's pretty polarizing, that's true. Yeah.
Especially because, like, which is funny because for Treadwell, there's, film guys that love Treadwell, there's film guys that don't love Treadwell, there's the same thing with the analytics side. Thomas was pretty clearly like film versus analytics because of his college production, just okay athletic profile and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But so for Thomas, though, you're right. He's a very good route runner. I think that you mentioned contested catches. I think he's just okay in that regard. I think there are sometimes he doesn't play like a big receiver, which is interesting because, he's like a good route runner who's solid after the catch. You would think that that's like an inherent, like if I just told you that, you would say, all right, well, that's probably like a smaller guy, but he's not. He's bigger. And I think that's what's interesting to me. I don't think he ever really truly harnessed his size or physical ability. And when you're talking about, and it's the same thing with Sterling Shepard versus Treadwell too, I think this is where and these are closer debates. I think this is where you factor age in a little bit too. And there are a lot of guys there like John. Yeah, doing fantastic work with age. And I don't think that age in and of itself is like a positive or negative, but I think it does help you paint a range of outcomes for a prospect that combined with other metrics too. And I think that Treadwell's, just because he's one of the younger receivers, if not the youngest maybe in the draft class. He's
the second youngest, I think, after Jalen Marshall.
Right. Yeah. So I knew he's somewhere up there. He just has a wider range of outcomes in those two. And I think he is just definitely more physically dominant on the field than Michael Thomas.
So, it just sounds like, and I may have, put you in a corner by asking leading questions, but it sounds like the thing, maybe if you wanted to say there's a trump card, the thing that sets Treadwell apart from a lot of these other receivers to you is the physical style of play, his ability to win in tight spaces, as opposed to some other receivers that may be better route runners but don't win in tight spaces, like, say, Tyler Boyd. The ability to just assert himself, like his physical self on the field with his size. I mean, if you told me he was 6'2", for example, I wouldn't believe you, except when he stands next to, I think he's got like a 6'4", 6'5" teammate. Yeah. I wouldn't believe you because he plays really big, right? Like he plays bigger even than 6'2" to me, right?
I agree with that, and I think that's something that really can't be overstated. Approaching the wide receiver position from a physical mindset, and like to me, I really value route to route, play to play consistency from a receiver. I think that's what's in doing reception perception and charting out all of these guys, having them consistently approach the route or the play the same way every time. That's what turned me on to Allen Robinson last year. Like for example, his just consistent execution with technique and timing and everything. And I was like, well, if this guy gets the targets, he's going to be great. And I think that Treadwell is definitely the same player pretty much on every route, consistently approaches things from a physical mindset. And I think, like I said, that can't be really understated because it's just such a reliable presence for a quarterback. And yeah, I mean, playing bigger than his size, I was shocked when he was, only 6'2" as well, because he does offer such a wide catch radius, wide target for his quarterback. And yeah, I mean, just that ability to take over a matchup, not necessarily take over a game, but like just overwhelm the opposition and play like a badass. I think that's something that's very valuable.
Were you able to watch any of Treadwell's 2014 tape? I know the Vikings talked about how a lot of what they were scouting, a lot of the reasons that they valued Treadwell had more to do with 2014. Than it did necessarily with, at least definitely the early part of 2015, but necessarily the 2015 stuff. Did you watch any of that 2014 stuff? Is that informing sort of your opinions? I know it's not in your backyard banner reception perception, but I mean, you may have watched him, right?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely watched him live. I remember watching the game that where he screwed up his knee, and I remember being really excited about him back then as well too. So I watched them live, and like I would go back and watch some of the cut-ups of his older games, as well as some other guys that people threw that around. Like keep mentioning Tyler Boyd. he's another person that like Boyd supporters would tell you like, we got to go back and watch the old tape. And I'm like, I don't really think you do. I think that I really, really don't think you do. So for guys like that, I would go back and look in it. But yeah, you're right. I don't include it in reception perception because if I wasn't going to do it for one guy, I wasn't going to do it for everybody. I wasn't going to do it for one guy. But yeah, I've seen some of the old stuff, and I think there's definitely more explosion there. Now, I know that some doctors, maybe specifically one that is not very credible. I know he said something on Twitter about well, that, you know, this injury, like he should be recovered or whatever. So I don't know if that plays any part in it, but I mean, I can see what the Vikings are on about there for sure.
So, and this is maybe a question you can't answer because it's a question of the way I record data versus the way that you record data. But for some reason, I've got Treadwell winning 5 of 12 contested catches in the 8 games that I watched. You don't watch the broadcast tape. You watch, you watch the all 22, which that might be a reason that we're charting contested catches a little bit differently. But why do you think that there might be such a discrepancy between, say, you know, I'm charting 5 of 12, you're charting, like something great, like 70%. I don't have the thing in front of me, but a pretty good rate for you.
I would say that not everybody thinks a contested catch is a contested catch. Everybody defines it differently, which is, you know, that's something that, and this is a little bit of a side note, but people have asked me if they can help me chart data for reception perception. And I think that would cause a lot of problems because I might define, and I can tell somebody that I define it this way, but when you're actually watching it, you know, your brain registers things differently. And I think that will always be, you know, an issue. And that's why I would prefer to just keep doing it myself. But, you know, like I said, that's a side note. But I think so that's one thing. Like I might define it, what's a contested catch differently than what you might define as a contested catch. I also I try to very clearly separate drops from contested catches. And I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that might be a thing because he does have a better than average drop rate in reception perception, and you know that's something we could talk about too. But yes, yeah, so I'd like to completely separate the two because I think that like one of the things that drives me nuts is when you hear people say like, well, you know, Martavis Bryant has a drop problem, and he might drop some balls every now and again, but a lot of times people are getting on him for, you know, dropping passes in contested situations or of incredibly high degree of difficulty catches. So I like to separate the two. Because a defender does not have to have their hand on the ball, right? For that to be, what you would consider a contested catch, right? Because, or at least if they don't have their hand on the ball and they're pulling at an arm and someone drops it, that isn't a drop to you. No, yeah, correct. And I think that especially if a guy leaves his feet, like more often than not, and there's a defender near him, I'm going to chart that as a contested catch because, you know, you have to go into that mindset that I'm leaving my feet, I'm going to take a hit, or the defender is already there. I think that that's something that's always going to go down as a contested catch for me.
So and obviously, like, we don't want to spend too much time like defining terms in this podcast, otherwise we'll lose listeners. But if he goes over the middle, he catches the ball, he's in the air, like you said, and someone just tags him from behind, like Carl Joseph, just like speeding missile, tags him from behind, and the ball pops out. Defender never touches the ball, hits him just in the back, right? So that's a contested catch, not a drop ball to you?
Yeah, I would not chart that as a drop. Because I think like when I'm charting drops, I'm looking at like just straight up, like, you know, he turns on it like a Kelvin Benjamin drop, you know, like you just you clearly see it has to be like how the hell did he do that sort of drop? Not every time, but very I pretty clearly define like a drop as just like, you know, he puts up his hands, hits them and drops it. Not necessarily the defender interferes with it or he takes a hit or something like that. Cause I think those are two separate things. And, you know, it's a bit of, like I said, it's a subjective art of the entire thing. You can't contextualize a football play purely because there's just so much going on.
Oh, that's fair. So then I've got, a couple of other questions because, I've been somewhat of a critic of Laquan Treadwell. I think it's been kind of overstated because they ultimately thought he was a first-round receiver, and the Vikings drafted him somewhat late in the first round, so like not a huge amount of problems for me. But so for me, Treadwell was like number 4 or number 5, which is pretty different than what a lot of people have, what you used to have. And to me, this sort of thing popped out. So obviously to you, athleticism matters, but it doesn't matter as much as it may to some other people. And in particular, when we talk about athleticism, I'm not talking about athleticism on the field, which kind of sucks. It makes me sound a bit more of an idiot, but tested athleticism. And his 4.6 340, obviously that's been a big part of the conversation surrounding him. But there's other elements to his athleticism that were a little bit more disappointing. So, for example, I think he had like a 33-inch vertical. His broad jump was pretty disappointing for someone of his height and weight. And his 10 split, which I know Sports Science did a thing where his 10 split was better than Josh Doxson's or something. But it's like a different timing mechanism on different turf, and they didn't get a bunch of receivers in to test a huge sample or anything like that. So I'm not super comfortable using that. But his 10 split wasn't great either. And so I know all of these things are a better picture of sort of an athlete than just the 40 time. But something that jumped out to me when I was researching 40 times is that when you take a look at players that have run a 4.6 40 or slower, you've only got one receiver who averages over 1,000 yards a season, and that's Kelvin Benjamin. And you've got no receivers that average between 400 and 999 yards a season, 0 receivers. And then you've got 3 receivers that average over 300 yards. And that's a set of 59 receivers. And if you take a look at the receivers that ran a 4.37 40 or faster, and that's 62 receivers, so it's almost identical in sample size. You get a very even distribution. 3 or 4 of those receivers end up running over 1,000 yards a season, and then you've got 1 or 2 in every single category of 100 yards since then. So it seems like the speed element is playing a pretty big role, at least at the extremes. The 4.37 receivers are hitting at rates higher than the average receiver, but more importantly, the 4.6 40 receivers and slower are hitting at an astronomically slow or a low rate. And the only person above is Kelvin Benjamin, who weighs about 25 pounds more than Treadwell. So to me, you have to make the case that Treadwell is kind of a unicorn, or is a huge outlier, right? And that the outlier could be because there's some sort of injury involved here, or it could be because his style of play is just so different than the other slow receivers. And this is between 2005 and 2015. So, it doesn't include like apocryphal times like Jerry Rice or anything like that. Can you make the case that Treadwell is that kind of outlier?
Yeah. And I think that, you've said it, you said a lot of really key words there, and the first one being outlier. And I think that what, analytics and a lot of analytics and tested athleticism and data gleaned from that paints that range of outcomes and odds that you're going to have this guy hit. And I think that's super important. And if I was running an NFL team, I would want to have a ton of those guys in my employment to help inform my decisions. Because like I said, it's important to have that sort of that range of outcomes. I think where film study comes in and stuff that, I do, which, takes film study and kind of puts it into a hard data point, a quantifiable piece of information so that you can use it as analytics and study different trends and data and all that sort of stuff more than just like, hey, I'm a scout and these are my notes. Cool, neat. That doesn't really do a lot for me. I think the point of that sort of stuff is to help identify that this could be one of those outliers. And I think that if you look at his numbers and compare them to his reception perception numbers and compare them to some of the guys that, run in a similar fashion, I think that his are so much better. I haven't been doing this for very long. This is really this is my first season doing college prospects, but because his success rate versus coverage metrics and others like that are so much more indicative of a faster receiver, I think that gives me hope that he could be one of those outliers. And that's why I think that it's important to combine all of the methods of player analysis in order to come away with takes like that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like, I think the idea behind, or at least in my head, the idea behind using analytics to help in your evaluation of prospects, because I think is to add rigor and uniformity to the process that allows you to compare players across spectra. And I think that
it keeps you honest as an analyst and as an observer, like because you can't, and I think there was somebody posted a screenshot of an article, and I don't know who wrote it. Some posted saying it, about Derrick Henry, like that he gets brought down on first contact a lot, or far too often he gets brought down by the first defender. And to me, I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? What does far too often mean to this person? And how does that how does his far too often compare to other players far too often? So I think, and again, I'm not trying to humble brag more about myself, but I think what makes what I do useful and other things like it, is that it keeps me honest. It keeps, my readers, lets them know that I'm being honest with what I'm saying. Like if I'm telling you that a guy did something a lot, I'm going to show you how often I saw him do it. And that's why you can formulate trends off that, and it helps you. Like it's like we're saying, it helps you make better decisions, keeps you honest, and so you can pull over things from year over year and not just throw out anecdotal like this guy doesn't do this or he doesn't do this enough or he does this a whole lot. Well, how much? Like again. Tell me what that means. Show me what it means.
No, fair enough. And I think one ancillary benefit, I think, to a focus on, charting and providing numbers to words that often have ambiguity is actually defining a lot of those terms. Like I know that Matt Waldman, basically just a film guy. It's not that he hates analytics or anything like that, but that's not his arena. He's an extremely good analyst when it comes to breaking down film. But one of the things that it feels like he found out when he was doing his film work is that he started applying, rigor to it. And when you start to apply rigor to it, when you start creating checklists, which is a lot of his process, you have to define your terms. And I think that that's something that you found when you started charting. Like, what does it mean to separate? Do I have to have one definition for a receiver, or should I have sort of a variable definition based on whether or not receivers can win with this kind of separation? What does it mean? And I know you've also got, drops in there. You've also got, targets in there. And targets, a lot of people don't think about this. Those need to be defined too. You've got, like contested catches, obviously, we just talked about the definitions there. But then you also have first contact drop and broken tackles and stuff like that. And so you have to define a lot of these terms. And I think that's a pretty useful exercise in and of itself, right?
It absolutely is. And all of this is essentially, it's like education. There's a push in education for teachers to become, either very rubric graders or very holistic graders. And I think that guys like Waldman and myself have taken more of a rubric approach to watching film. And when you have a rubric, you have a very clear set of like, this is what you need to do to get this grade. You need to hit this many benchmarks in your term paper in order to get an A. And if you hit 3 of 4, maybe then you get a B, but you don't get the A unless you hit 4 of 4 or, whatever. And I think it all comes back to that, having a rubric, having a clearly defined set of what you're looking for, what you're charting. And I think that's what makes, and I'll just say Waldman so that I'm not saying myself. This what makes Waldman's work so great is that, he shows you all that work. He shows you what it took to arrive to those conclusions. And then so you can compare player over player. And, it's not just, that's why it's not just a scouting guide. It's not just like the RSP is more than that, because it's not just an analyst saying like, these are this player's strengths and these are his weaknesses. Or, I saw him do this. It's like, it shows you this is how often it happened. He did this good or this well to hit this benchmark. And I think that's, it's rubric grading over holistic grading. And I think that more film watchers, to be honest, should employ that same approach because it keeps you honest and it's just, it's a better way to do things, in my opinion.
I mean, that makes sense. What are the drawbacks to this? Because I know that if you've got a checklist of qualities, and Waldman talks about this a lot, but I want to get your take. If you get a checklist of qualities, you could have the same receiver hit all the same checklists as another receiver, but you rate him, 2 rounds if you want to use round grades, or 5 ranks if you want to use ranks, or a full letter grade or whatever grade, you rank him much better than the other receiver who hit all of the same checklists. Like, how can that happen? What are the drawbacks to a rubric-based system? Like, what do you think are the things you have to watch out for when you start doing it this way?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good question. And I'll take it from kind of, a bird's eye view of the entire thing is like, this is just one step, one part of the process in player evaluation. Like, I would caution anybody out there listening that hears an analyst say, like, my way is the only way, or I'm the only answer, I'm the Jesus Christ of player evaluation. Sorry, no, that's not offensive. But like,
not on this podcast.
Come to me for the way, the truth, and the light of player evaluation. My process is all that really you need. I think it's BS. I'm just a piece of the puzzle, just as much as Walton is just a piece of the puzzle. That's why you incorporate other methods like analytics and measured athleticism and production-based things and of all that nature. That's why you have that, because it's not a full answer. And again, if a player, checks all your boxes in the same fashion, but you still feel the other one is better, maybe you look at his other, his other metrics in terms of production or measured athleticism or whatever. But sure, just in my process in general and what I feel some of the drawbacks are to the rubric-based grading, because it doesn't account for things that I think are inherently important to football players and to, the development of human beings in general. And that's things like intangibles. I mentioned like that physical mentality that bully ball that Treadwell plays with. That's something that I don't think you can chart. I don't like, you can't really chart. Like, he played like a bully on 85.6% of his plays. Because talk about something that is incredibly subjective and
you would be the best stereotype of what people often think of analytics people, I think.
Yeah, right.
Sentences like that.
that would be ridiculous. And I mean, talk about something that's very subjective and like just can't really quantify. And but that's important. I think that's important to player evaluation. And just because something is subjective does not make it wrong or bad. And I think that's something that you see a lot that drives me nuts.
I've had this conversation a lot too. Yeah, definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's something that drives me nuts when you hear like, metrics people that are like only numbers or whatever, that if it's not objective, then it doesn't matter. And I think that's stupid too, because so much of your life is, I mean, you could go way on a tangent on this, but I think literally your entire reality is subjective. But again, whole other question. I have been on the road for a while, but yeah, no. So I think that like things like that, like that you have to be open to allowing some of those intangible aspects into your rubric. You can't, life is not purely defined in boxes, and neither is player evaluation, even though I think it is a very helpful method to the way to do things.
Next time on Norse Code, is there a capital T truth? We investigate. No, okay, so I think we've talked a little bit about Treadwell and a lot about the discussion about Treadwell, which that's probably good enough for a lot of listeners. What are some of the thoughts you have about, Mackenzie Alexander? I mean, he probably went up against a lot of the players that you've been charting. And I mean, obviously you also watch football. You probably also watched Mackenzie Alexander play a lot. He's a guy that I think almost everybody in sort of the Vikings universe is really excited about. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that he brings, which is so funny because you heard like out of the combine at first, like, oh, people love Mackenzie Alexander's swagger and his confidence, and then suddenly it was a negative.
And then,
where the hell? How did we get here? But I think that swagger and confidence, that's like the first thing I look for in a cornerback, because that is just so important. I mean, you talk about it. I have a complicated relationship with the Panthers, and Josh Norman obviously no longer with the team. But the thing that always stood out to me about Norman was that he had that he had that cockiness to him, and you have to basically be a cocky asshole to be a successful cornerback, and he had that, but his play just never backed it up. And I was always like, if his physical ability, which he had, like the length and everything, if that could ever combine itself into good play and marry with his just intensity, I think that would be he would be a fantastic player. And that's exactly what happened. And I think that Alexander has some of that too. And you mentioned watching him again, some of the receivers that I charted, he was definitely one of the guys that gave Sterling Shepard the most problems. And you know how well Sterling Shepard comes out in reception perception. So I think that he has a lot of really good qualities. He seems kind of like different than what the Vikings type has been at cornerback, but I think that they'll find something for him. I tend to like players that have his approach to the game.
Sure. Yeah. I think, I was mentally cataloging some of the best corners, in the game. And I think that you're right. I think that you take a look at either the top corners or people purported to be the top corners. So, you've got your Darrelle Revis's, your Richard Sherman's, your Patrick Peterson's, although a lot of people disagree on that one. And, for a time, Joe Hayden. And you think about that, Aqib Talib, Chris Harris, Leon Hall, Terrence Newman, Pac-Man. You think about that, and like literally one person out of all of that did not strike me as a cocky asshole, and that's Joe Hayden. Right? Like the rest of them seem a little bit less with Patrick, but still super cocky. But it seems like
right after Norman got cut, he was the one that tweeted, "Know your worth" or whatever. And of course, it was great that right after that he deleted it and then said like, that wasn't something that I would say. So I deleted it. I was like, no, but you said it. just don't delete it and then address the fact that you deleted it.
Right. Also, know what tweets are worth.
But so yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you though. They're like all those guys are jerks, but it makes them good.
Right. Well, so yeah. What is it about Alexander that gave Shepard so many issues? Because I watched the same thing. It was kind of surprising because very often to me it seemed like Alexander kind of won the first step, won the second step, absolutely lost the third step, and then was fine. Like, what was it about Alexander that seemed to give Sterling Shepard such fits?
I think, well, for one, he is more physical as a press corner than a lot of the Pac or the Big 12, whatever conference it is, down there. So I think that was definitely something he probably wasn't used to. And I don't think like he locked out Sterling Shepard or like I wouldn't say, because that was one thing like of course you get a lot like, well, Sterling Shepard got shut down by Clemson. I'm like, I don't think that's an accurate representation, but he definitely gave him problems because he's a good, solid technical press corner. That's something that he's not used to seeing. I think that he definitely reacts well. I think that he has a quick anticipatory way of playing the cornerback position. Like he's hardly ever caught off guard or like caught off guard so bad that he can't recover. Like you mentioned, wins the first two steps, loses the third, but doesn't seem to be in too much trouble. And I think that's because he's got a good instincts and he can react well.
Sure. So after that, we're going to get into, because I don't think the Vikings had a third round pick. We're going to get into some, I should know this. I cover the team. But we're going to get into some players that are more deep cuts. Fourth round pick, Willie Beavers. Do you have any thoughts at all? It's okay if you don't. Have any thoughts at all besides his name? Okay, fantastic. Kentrell Brothers, Mizzou. Did you get the chance to watch any of his play?
Well, I know he's the one that tested terribly.
He's undersized and slow. Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's normally not a good thing. I did get to see some of it. And he definitely, I think he'll be a special teamer at worst. I don't know if he'll ever play in a base defense, but I think that he brings the kind of intense, and that's why everybody he's the classic guy. He's just a football player.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I know he's a football player. Great. He's going to be just a special teamer. Cool.
No, I think one of those really well-defined terms that you love, right?
Right. He's just a football. I think I joked one time, people that say he's just guys that are just a football player is going to be used to be a football player pretty soon because they're
that's not a bad way to put it. Yeah. Because it means the evaluator who's saying it cannot point to qualities that they think will translate, right?
Just making an excuse because they like the guy, they like what they saw on film. But yeah, you mentioned translation is important too. And saying he's just a football player, well, no shit, that doesn't help me anyway.
Yeah, that'd be really funny, but I would lose a lot of confidence in my process. So, bit of a double-edged sword. Would set Twitter on fire, but then I'd have to go back and look at everything. So that's my confidence.
I'm only here for the chaos. I have no like stake in this fight at all. I'm only here to watch the Twitter burn. I know you and several other of my hashtag pals online would go down in flames for it, but sorry, you're collateral damage. The crying Jordan comes for us all someday.
It's true. It spares no one. Speaking of big-bodied quarterbacks with bad tape, Mitch Leidner just got a first-round projection from Todd McShay. Just throwing that out there. After that, so just putting that out there. Have you been able to watch any of? You probably watched J-Ron Curse, but we'll talk about him last. But these late-round picks that are not Moritz, have you watched any of David Morgan or Stephen Weatherly?
Cannot say that I have.
Fair enough. Do you have any impressions of J-Ron Curse?
Yeah, I think that whole Clemson defense was great this year, and I think that he's got some ability that's worth tapping into. And again, definitely saw him play against some of the other receivers that I charted. So I think that there's something there. It's definitely an interesting pick to me.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that's the Vikings draft, everybody. We talked about 3 or 4 of those players. That's fun. We did do an in-depth show last week talking about those players. Just wanted to get Matt's opinion because he is a hashtag smart football guy, and we value his football opinions. That's why we brought him onto the show. Yeah. We've also got some mailbag questions I've directed at you specifically, all relatively the same. But Dusty, do you have those mailbag questions queued up?
The highlight.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can take a whack at some of these.
Cool.
Justin Rubin at Justin M. Rubin writes us, what is Mobo's success rate versus coverage on 9 routes this year? 99% or 100%?
1, we're doing away with that nickname, whoever sent that question in. So that's first. 2, I did not chart Moritz Boehringer as I've mentioned before. But I'm sure it's 1,000% considering that he was playing against probably cornerbacks that weigh as much as, a middle schooler or whatever Arif was saying earlier. So I'm sure it's 1,000.
Just like flinging them away, like Arnold Schwarzenegger flings away the little kids when he's running down the hall in Kindergarten Cop.
Bowling pins just falling.
Oh, I never saw Kindergarten Cop.
Oh, one of the best Schwarzenegger movies.
Oh, I've seen like 5 movies, so don't be shocked. I'm not a movie person.
That's fair. I've never seen The Godfather.
Well, okay. I'm more comfortable with you having not watched any movies than you watching a lot of movies and just missing out on the classics.
Oh yeah, I've missed out on like all of the classics, which is great because I live with Alex Gelhar who works at NFL.com too, and he's like the biggest movie person. We have this giant shelf of DVDs or like this giant like bookcase of DVDs, and one little measly shelf is mine, and it's like half The Office DVDs. It's pathetic. Which is like great. Like, why did I even buy that? Didn't I know Netflix was going to come around? That was dumb.
What's a DVD?
Yeah, right.
Now it's very fancy plastic garbage.
It's a Frisbee disc for my dog.
Well, at least Charlie gets some good use out of him. Hit the Quan at Jesse_Silbaugh writes us, how often do receivers actually improve their technical precision in routes in the NFL?
Yes, that is a really good question. I don't know if I can again tell you like how often or but it definitely happens. And I think I can give some specific examples. Dante Moncrief is a player that I thought had horrendous technique at Ole Miss. I thought he was just a mess from that perspective. I didn't really like him at all coming out of college. But then in year one, I thought I saw some real improvement. And he's a player I like to cite for multiple reasons. One, because I've seen a year-to-year progression as far as the mess he was in college to year one, having a better than average reception perception considered comparing to some of the other rookies that year. So I really liked him then. And then this past season, I thought he ran some great routes. If you go back and watch the week 2 game against the Jets, there's several really strong timing routes, great comeback routes against, Darrelle Revis and other very good cornerbacks. So he's one that I think is a great example. And I also like to cite him because I think he highlights an important principle that Ryan Riddle has talked about a lot, in that, we often talk about receivers or players in general are going to get coached up, at the next level. Mm-hmm. And he's mentioned before that that's really not what happens.
It doesn't happen very often. Yeah.
Right. It's more on veterans. And if you look back at when Donte Moncrief came in there, that's when Reggie Wayne was still there on the back end of his career, obviously, but you could, at least think that perhaps some of that, and I've heard, through this, that, or the other, that there was a pretty good, relationship back and forth there, with Wayne and the younger guys, and perhaps that's a reason why. So he's a good example. It does not always improve. That's the thing that's important, is it does not always improve. In fact, sometimes it can even regress. But
that's an aside that deserves an example. Do you have any examples of players who have regressed in their technical precision or route running skill?
Yeah, I think, and this is still a relatively new one, and I'm not saying that he's cooked, but I mean, Devontae Parker is a guy that I think, and if you even remember, midway through the season, there was a report, or I know Roto World blurbed about it, that Parker was having to go back and watch himself play at Louisville just to remind himself that he was good. I don't know if you guys.
Oh, I remember seeing that too. That was so sad.
Right, and which is funny, because then soon after that he ended up Rashard Matthews got hurt and he got on the field and he made some plays. But I would say that technique was a worry with him coming out of school, and I don't even know. This probably actually isn't a very good example, because technique was a worry with him coming out of school, and I think he just got. There were some times where he definitely got exposed with that. So maybe that's not the best example. I mean, a great example is Devontae Adams, who I think is regressed from year to
probably
year.
The best example. Yeah.
That's a great, because I thought he was an oak. He wasn't a horrendous. He was a better technician coming out of college than Devontae Parker was, in my opinion. But then he was poor year one. I mean, his reception perception was very, very bad in year one. And then year two, was just a disaster. I mean, even that's the funny thing about him. I never thought he was a very good route runner, especially year one. But then just watching the overall technique, in terms of catching the football, and playing in contested situations, which was something he did very, very well in college. I think overall technique there just completely fell apart. So he's probably the best example of the inverse of Donte Moncrief, as opposed to growing from college to year one to year two, has regressed from college to year one to year two.
Okay, so I'm trying to test something. Do you have an example of just another receiver who improved their technique in the NFL besides Donte Moncrief?
I would say Mike Evans is a guy that is on that path right now. So he's somebody that I would point to.
Okay, so that was perfect, because the thing I was looking up was all of these players' ages. Donte Moncrief is younger than the Colts' first-round pick from this year, Ryan Kelly, by about 3 months. Younger.
Right.
Mike Evans is right now, he's 22 years old, which means that he entered the league, at 20 years old. Devontae Adams, Devontae Parker are both 23 years old. Devontae Adams entered, I think, the league a little bit younger than Parker, if I'm remembering correctly. But they're both older, right? Adams not as much, Parker definitely. Do you think that, and obviously sample size of 2 in either direction, but there just happened to be the players that you named as having improved, and happened to be the players you named as having regressed or not improved. Do you think that plays a hugely significant role, a significant role, a minor role? What is your reaction to that to that information.
I think that's not incredibly surprising. And actually, there was an article written on RotoViz this year that actually named me by name in there, and it wasn't a shade piece, so I'm not hashtag mad online about it. But it mentioned comparing like Laquan Treadwell versus Sterling Shepard, because everybody knows how high I am on Sterling Shepard. I've called him the best route runner, and yada yada yada. And it was it was mentioning whether you can see age show up on film, and I think that's so. I think that's kind of what you're saying. It's the same thing too. Like, are these guys more polished, because of their, like, could Sterling Shepard kind of have the same thing happen to him? That was the question I think the author was posing, and I would disagree on that particular argument, but I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of, again, I mentioned like age painting that wide range of outcomes. So you can't you can't definitively say like, because Dante Moncrief is younger, he is going to improve as a route runner. But you can say because he is younger, there is more time, there is more, physical ability that's left untapped. So there's, again.
And there's also like more probably mental elasticity, right?
Right.
Like, I think your ability to learn information decreases with age. And I think that's sort of the cliff, and not learn information, but sort of incorporate information and change the way that you think and stuff like that. Which is super depressing probably for most of our listeners and definitely everybody on this podcast. But hey, the cliff.
I'm at my peak basically.
What? You're 24?
Yeah.
Screw you.
Well, I was going to say, I definitely feel I can speak personally to that, and that like I feel a lot more mentally progressed as a 24-year-old than I did as a 22-year-old. Or
right. And I think that most people would agree that like the evolution in the way that they think between like ages 18 and 20, 20 and 22, 22 and 24, 24 and 26, whatever. Probably the biggest is between like 18 and 20, then 20 and 22. And then 22 to 24, and then between 24 and 26, probably, not that much, right? So I think and this is a pretty easy argument to talk about because I think everybody can relate to it, right? Where like, it's just easier to learn things when you're younger, and that keeps going until you're probably around 28. I say probably because I'm not citing any specific research, I'm just like going off of kind of what I remember. But yeah, because that has to play a role.
I think it definitely plays a role, and it plays a role in your development as a physical being as well too. That's why everybody mentioned
for sure.
mentioned staying fit and all that sort of stuff. When I was a kid, when I was fat as a kid, my mom always used to dog me about like, we got to do it when you're younger because it's easier when you're younger, and it's easier to do it this, that, and the other. And I think that's the same thing. Like you're able to change your body and even just align your body with your physical or with your mental processing of routes and all that sort of stuff. It's probably much easier when all of it is much easier when you're younger.
All right. Dusty, we got any more questions specific to Matt, or we should just have him answer some questions that don't have anything to do with it?
Yeah, we got a couple. We could maybe do the boiling frog thing, like start with some relevant questions and then just devolve into complete degeneracy. JP at Justin_Pullman writes us, how hard did Rick Spielman LOL when Miami forked over the meat of their 2017 draft to us? My guess is he strapped on his Lawler blades and Lawler skated all the way to his ROFLcopter, whereupon he flew away in a cloud of Roffles.
Matt, your take.
I don't think I can say it any better than Dusty just did. But no, yeah, probably a lot.
Huge assets to grab Miami's 3rd and 4th year pick next year, and all the Vikings had to give up was their 3rd round pick, I believe, and they just got a free pick out of it.
Why did they do that? And I know that this is something that is stupid because we say it all the time, and this might just be from a dynasty fantasy football perspective, but that's something that's been huge in the dynasty community this offseason is everybody's really pumped about the 2017 class, and it might not be like stretching so far as into the 3rd and 4th round or whatever, but
right.
This wasn't like a gangbusters draft or anything this year, so I think that acquiring future picks is smart.
Yeah, I mean, Miami specifically, they like had a target in mind. I think they traded up for Leonte Carew, which, I mean, I love him. That kind of makes sense, right?
Thanks a lot, Miami. Jeez, God, screw all the people that really like Leonte Carew. So he's like your third receiver, and now we have to hear stupid arguments about how he's better than Jarvis Landry or something. I don't know. From some dumb idiots that only know how to. Okay, never mind. I'm being really too mean. Sorry. I'm gonna stop.
No, that's perfect. It'll drive clicks. Keep going.
Yeah, who specifically are these dumb idiots?
Yeah, well, let me tell you by name. No, I think that there's definitely.
No, I get what you're saying. This reminds me of the argument a while back that Benjamin Albright was having with some other opinionated persons about the relative value of Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. Ben's argument was that Demaryius Thomas, although a good receiver, was not as good as Emmanuel Sanders, but because he could threaten at every level of the field, he could run every route and fit timing offenses in particular a lot better. Whereas Demaryius Thomas was a little bit more one-dimensional, but was productive in that dimension. It caused a lot of arguments until actually this year when Emmanuel Sanders was better than Demaryius Thomas from a production standpoint too. It's a similar argument to me.
Yeah, I think that like people that knock Jarvis Landry for like his yards per target being low or something, I think are just kind of missing. Yeah, exactly. They're kind of missing the point. And I would just, in my little black book, I've noticed that the people that make that argument are also happen to be very big Leonte Carew supporters. So I would say that there's maybe a correlation.
That's going to be interesting. Yards per target, I think one of my least favorite statistics ever.
It's the WOT. It's the WOT, like wide receiver statistic. It's so bad.
We probably have the same objection, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, it just because it doesn't. Jarvis Landry is a great example because I definitely think he gets targeted too much. Like I think that because I don't think you should run your offense through a slot receiver. But he operates in short areas of the field, so it doesn't. It's not the same as a guy that's like, I don't know. I'm not making a lot of sense with that description, but I also think that I think my biggest criticism of it is you cannot paint it as just a simply like one-to-one evaluation tool for wide receivers, especially because you're introducing several other variables into the equation when you look at yards per target. You're introducing the variable of the quarterback and everything else that goes along with what a wide receiver needs to accrue production, which is something like, that's a point to be made about all wide receiver statistics is that you're introducing another variable. I think that one inherently
in particular. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's my biggest criticism of it. And I gain literally no value from yards per anything, statistics.
Not even yards per route run?
Well, I think that's a little bit better. But
I think it's a lot better.
But you're still, Yeah, you have to, I agree with you that if you're using a yards per whatever statistic, especially for receivers, and including, yards per route run, which I like, you have to account for or control for, which are two sort of different things. One is much more difficult than the other, but you have to account for or control for the quality of the quarterback or quarterbacks. Very often you'll have receivers get, passes from multiple quarterbacks, and the quality of opposition at the very least. Yeah.
The reason I hate yards per target is because targets are also a measure of talent. They're very often and you're dividing a talent-based statistic, yards, by a talent-based statistic, target.
Right.
And you're like, honestly, they kind of cancel out. Like from a dimensional analysis perspective, from like high school chemistry, they kind of cancel. But like, it doesn't produce meaningful information to me. If you get more targets, you're probably a better receiver. If you're not, it means the quarterback's bad, which, why are we using this if it's dependent on a bad quarterback? So that's my issue.
See, people don't like to view targets as a measure of talent because it takes away.
Absolutely.
It takes away one of their. It takes away the denominator. or which for almost all of these stupid stats that people come up with, whatever by target, because it's an easy thing to do. Like, it just takes a lot less effort to go on Pro Football Reference, and I'm not saying that people are lazy that do this, and that's certainly not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying that, like, it takes another layer of analysis than to look at something on a yards per target basis, or at least critically think about why there might be some serious flaws in that. And
right.
Yeah, no, I think that
it's interesting. I don't think there have been any studies that have indicated that yards per target is stable, like there are.
It's just something. I might be being cynical here, and that's totally fine. Like I said, I'm eating nothing but granola and turkey jerky, and I've been driving a month, so I might just be being cranky. But I think that there's just I don't even know what I was going to say now. So you know what? Just never mind. Forget it.
Frustrated. Dusty, next question.
It's a frustrating topic.
Okay. Last one that is Matt specific, and then you can go cleanse yourself or whatever you need to do. Let Charlie go for a walk, or you can stick around. Doesn't matter. Official question asker Tommy Gunn writes us at TommyTheGun13 on Twitter. How did the rest of the NFC North do this draft? # please say bad.
This is a really good question. I have opinions, but I bet Matt also potentially has opinions. Reminder, the NFC North teams are Green Bay Packers, Detroit Lions, and Chicago Bears.
Thank you for reminding me. I definitely forgot. I liked what Chicago did. The Leonard Floyd pick I know definitely has some varying opinions. But I think that there were some other parts of their draft that I really like. I liked getting the 2 skill position players that they did on day 3. Jordan Howard's an interesting run. Like, he's a guy that I think could be competent. Like, if you had to throw him in a pinch, I think he'd be all right. Lance Zierlein's really high on him. He works in NFL media too, obviously. He really likes him a lot. So I think that's a good pick. And I like Daniel Braverman in the 7th round. I mean, I think that any offense can use a player like that. To what degree is another question, but I think that the slot receiver comparisons that he gets are pretty apt. So they were a pretty good draft to me. I liked what they did overall. Green Bay's was pretty solid. I was kind of surprised but not surprised that they didn't address inside linebacker like earlier than they did. But I think they also got some interesting pieces for sure. So I don't think, and then even Detroit, I don't think they necessarily had a bad draft either. I don't really know too much about Taylor Decker, but I did like that plenty of people said that, he was basically the same player as Jack Conklin and just went in the same range, and they didn't have to give up a 2nd to 3rd round pick
to get him. Yeah.
So, but I liked Detroit's draft overall too. I think that they got some I don't think they knocked it out of the park with any single one of their picks, but I think that they've got some guys that are going to contribute. I don't think any of these teams had a bad draft.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with all of that, which is sort of unfortunate for Vikings fans. But I think the Chicago Bears, I think a lot of it hinges, like you said, on Leonard Floyd. I think that Leonard Floyd, to me, is not as good of an edge rusher as he is an off-ball linebacker, which is kind of what I was viewing him as. And it sounds like Chicago's going to use him as an edge rusher, which I think is it's not like Deion Jordan levels of misuse or anything like that. But it just feels like you're not maximizing what you're getting out of him. But that's fine. Cody Whitehair, great pick. Jonathan Bullard, fantastic pick. And then they doubled up on safety, mostly for depth. I think that they kind of like the young players that they have in the secondary, but they also got D'Andre Houston Carson. A lot of competition they'll have in that secondary. I also like Jordan Howard as a player. I think that he probably pairs really well with Jeremy Langford. And so you can get probably a pretty good running back core going if those are your 2 guys. And you already have opinions on Daniel Braverman that I already agree with. I think, Green Bay, for me, I was very up and down on their draft. I thought, for example, Jason Spriggs was a fantastic pick because they've got, I think they've got 3 players on 1-year contracts in that offensive line, and I think you'll probably need to sit a year anyway. So they're in a good spot there. And I thought that Blake Martinez was a really good pick. I thought Dean Lowry was a phenomenal pick. But then I thought Kenny Clark was it's a fine pick, but not in the first round to me. I thought he was more of a late 2nd, early 3rd kind of player. That was kind of a misuse of their capital. I thought Kyler Fackrell was an awful pick. I thought Trevor Davis was not a very good pick. So there's a lot of really good picks, a lot of really bad picks. And that's kind of how I viewed the Green Bay Packers draft this year. I kind of viewed it last year like that too. So, we'll see how that turns out. Detroit, I thought, had a really good draft. Taylor Decker, great player, probably actually better than Jack Conklin. The NFL tends to be higher on Conklin. The forecasters in my consensus board were higher on him. I thought Ashawn Robinson and Graham Glasgow were really, really good picks. I thought Miles Killebrew in the 4th was solid. I thought Joe Dahl was great. And then Anthony Zettel in the 6th was very good too. And I thought Dwayne Washington in the 7th was very good. Picking a long snapper, kind of weird. Not a huge fan of that. And I thought Jake Rudock or Jake Ruddock or however you pronounce his name, bad pick. But overall, very good draft.
Part that sucked. That was the bad part of their draft. Was
yeah.
Was
that was bad. And
long snapper.
Yeah, Ruddock and the long snapper. But overall, I would characterize their draft as pretty good. So that's what I thought. Question asker. Forgot his name already. I feel bad.
Tommy the Gun, 13.
Tommy the Gun, official question asker. So that's the answer.
All right. The rest of our questions are fairly Viking specific, which I know is not your area of expertise. Matt, do you want to stick around, or would you like to be released from your bondage as Norse Code guest?
I would like to work out before the sun, the sun has already set. Oh my God, I'm so out of it. Clearly I need to go.
Yeah. Boy, that 10 p.m. sunset's a real magical thing. All right. Matt Harmon can be found at NFL.com and his own website, thebackyardbanter.com, where you will find the podcast that he is about to go edit. Is there anything else that you would like to plug before we let you go?
No, I don't think so. I think those are the main places you can find me right now. Football Guys too. I actually just wrote up a reaction to every wide receiver pick. Wrote up a big,
fantastic.
5,000 word hammer before I got on the road here. So if you want to check that out, they can do as well. And other than that, just keep following me on Twitter and Instagram for updates from the road. Maybe I'll survive this thing.
That's Matt Harmon _BVB. Or BYB. I missed the tail on the Y. Thanks for being on the show again, Matt. We'll see you in 6 weeks.
Being on.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
In a flurry of keyboard clicks, he disappears.
As he does.
It's like a smoke bomb. Tappa, 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 tappa. Tommy Gunn continues with the aforementioned Viking-specific questions. Who does, we decided we're calling him the Unicorn? Who does, Das...
Yeah, or Morbo. I think, when I start tweeting about him at training camp, it'll be Morbo, so...
there's always, Unicorn in German. We could call him Das Einhorn.
Yeah, that sounds dumb.
Not if you're German.
Sure.
At any rate, who does Morbo surpass to make the roster? Patterson or Thielen? And we can actually combine a question from Corey Strickland at Contract Corey in with this one. With drafting Treadwell, what receiver do you see on the hot seat? I would guess CJ. Charles who?
Charles what? Yes, that's 3 receivers that are potentially at risk according to our listeners, Charles Johnson, Cordero Patterson, and Adam Thielen. So my thought is that, and so Morbo has returned about 15 kicks in his nascent German career. And at least 2 of them were for touchdowns. So that's a pretty good rate. I don't really know what that means or how that projects, but if he is average at returning kicks, I think that's got to be it for Patterson. Because I think while the difference between an elite kick returner like Patterson very often can be and an average kick returner is pretty large, I think that if you got a guy who's raw at everything and is already average at a skill, that he can explode in this skill as he can in a bunch of other skills. And I think that would be it for Patterson. Other than that, I don't see Thielen's spot actually under that much risk. I think that Thielen's role on the team as a special teamer is going to be difficult for someone like Morbo to do. Like, I think that there's a lot of demands on Thielen. There's a lot of understanding of the way that special teams works. There's a lot of different skills that are not receiver skills that you have to learn that you can't just intuit. Like, one of the great things about kick returning is that other than actually catching the ball, there's not a lot of skills that you can teach, but a lot of skills that you can just have and intuit and know. And so he wouldn't have to be taught anything, but I think to replace Adam Thielen's role, he would have to be taught a lot of things that Thielen, knows, as well as, learning the sort of the receiving craft. So I think that probably Thielen is not going to be the one that gets cut in favor of Morbo if he gets on the roster, which is not to say Thielen's spot is safe. They did just add 2 receivers, but I think that if Thielen's spot is gone, it's because of a combination of the upside of a player like Morbo and because someone else can replicate a lot of the special teams he can do, and that wouldn't be Morbo, it'd be someone else. So that's something. And then Charles Johnson, I don't know, man. I don't really – it's difficult because at the beginning of the year, he was the guy, right? He was supposed to be more productive than Mike Wallace that they just brought in. He was supposed to be Teddy's guy. And that was at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, he was already a healthy scratch. He was on the inactive list. I can't think of a bigger doghouse than that, being a healthy scratch. So I could see him, but, hey, maybe this is the year that he turns it on. He's also kind of old, actually. A lot of people think of him as a young receiver, and he's not. I think that he's 28. I'm looking it up really quickly on Google. But he's not, a guy that is at the age, and we've been talking a lot about ages where, players, elasticity and stuff like that just a minute ago. He's 27, it turns out. And so he's kind of past the point where you can, I think, reasonably expect development. So I think that he could actually be on the hot seat. It doesn't cost a lot to cut him. And I think that he would be more likely a cut than Thielen, which is weird because when you think about sort of the natural talent that a player like Charles Johnson has, you always feel like, athletically, from that perspective, he's got more, quote unquote talent than Adam Thielen. But I don't know that Johnson can contribute in the ways that Thielen can. And I don't know that if you put Thielen on the field from scrimmage, that he would necessarily be all that worse than Johnson, because Johnson doesn't seem to respond to contact very well. And it's football, so it's kind of have to. So it would be difficult to see Morbo taking a spot on the roster. It would also be difficult for me to see the Vikings taking fewer than 6 receivers. Then again, they're probably taking 10 offensive linemen. You have to make cuts somewhere. So if they take 5, I think CJ is kind of the underdog person that could be cut, despite all the hype that was given to him this time last year.
Yeah, I think whether you're talking Treadwell or Morbo, it shows a clear focus towards what's going to be good for the Vikings in the future, and CJ is not really a part of that for all the reasons you were talking about. It sounds like, number one, if, one of the 6 doesn't survive roster cuts, it's probably going to be Morbo, and then question mark?
Right, yeah, if I were going to, it's of 7, right? If you add, Morbo and Treadwell and get rid of Wallace, yeah. And then obviously there's like Isaac Fricktier, the other guy's not going to make the roster basically. But yeah, Terrell Sinkfield, I think, is the other guy. But yeah, you take a look at those 7 minus Fripti and Sinkfield. Yeah, I think Morbo's the first one to go. I think that after that, if you wanted to rank them, I would say probably Johnson, Patterson, Thielen, despite the fact that Thielen, who is athletically, he's up there, right? He ran a 4.42 40 at the regional combine, a 4.45 at the super regional. He's 6'2", right? He's a little bit taller than Patterson, and he's got the weight too. So, Patterson ran like a 4.38 or something obscene. So it's not like they're necessarily on the same level athletically, but it's not like Thielen's a kind of a slacker in that area. So even though Johnson and Patterson are more athletically inclined, I think, than Thielen, I would see Thielen as making the roster above those 2. If it came down to, cutting one of those 3. Morbo would be able to take Patterson's job potentially. If not, Sherrills could take it as a kick returner. But yeah, I think that Patterson has the most expendable of the 6 spots, despite the fact that he provides so much value as a kick returner. And then I think Johnson's next. But I could listen to an argument to switch those 2 for sure.
Interesting. Perhaps we can have it next week. Nate Schetzel writes us with a couple of questions via email. We sent 2 punters to rookie minicamp. Do you think we have a real chance at competition this year for Jeff Locke?
This is a good question. It turns out Ben LeCompte, or whatever is, or however you pronounce his name, the NDSU punter, is not in minicamp. He will try out for the Vikings, I think, a week from now. He is going to be at Bears minicamp. He wants to get as many sort of bites at the apple as he can. And obviously, if the Bears sign him, he's going to be with the Bears. He's not going to show up to the tryout with the Vikings, which, whatever, fine. I was talking about this on that other podcast I'm on with Andy and Luke. And they kind of gave the odds overall, the ability to displace lock, somewhere between 2 and 5%. I think Andy gave it a 2%, Luke gave it a 3%, I gave it a 5%. All the milks basically. And I think it's unlikely that Nick O'Toole, otherwise known as Boomstache for a while, also known as Boom Beard, depending on how much facial hair he had at the time. It's going to be difficult because I haven't been able to watch a bunch of punter film, as it were, but from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like he has quite the accuracy that you want in a starting punter. But it's certainly possible. First, he has to earn a contract, which he doesn't have. There's like 9 or 10 UDFAs of a contract. There's one extra roster spot open for the Vikings to either sign one of those tryouts, which they've done every year for the past 3 years, I think, or sign another undrafted free agent, or sign like just a free agent, which they could do as well. You don't have to just get rookies; you could get a veteran. And so he has to get one of those contracts, which could be up for whatever. I don't think there's, given that I gave it like a 5% chance that one of the two take it, I think the idea of a real chance at competition this year for lock is a little unlikely. So I think that, unfortunately, Vikings fans are going to have to grit out one more year of lock.
Unfortunately is correct. Based on hype and history, should we just change the name of the Mr. Mankato Award to Hair Mankato now?
I don't think did Babs win the Mr. Mankato Award last year? I don't think he did.
No, I think it would have been fun if he did, but he didn't.
Right. So I'm wondering. So yeah, obviously Moritz is a favorite to win the Mr. Mankato competition this year, but I think Stephon Diggs might have won it, and he was kind of on the line for whether or not he could even qualify for the Mr. Mankato Award, which, if you don't like know who Mr. Mankato is, it's just the award they give at training camp to sort of the guy who's probably not going to make the roster, but does, and then gets a lot of buzz. I think you have to make the roster. But yeah, I think Stephon Diggs won it last year, which that makes sense. And then the year before, it was Adam Thielen. So it's been wide receivers. You could call it the Mr. Wide Receiver competition. They went back and retroactively assigned Mr. Mankato's as well. I don't know where that list is right now. But I think there's at least one more wide receiver. Jamar Johnson, I think, was a Mr. Mankato. But I think we also saw the occasional linebacker or cornerback or whatever. But it's very difficult for a non-receiver to win it, just because it's the highlights. And so it's the guy that people tend to cheer for as the underdog. Usually white, obviously not always. It's Stephon Diggs, and there has to be some sort of interesting angle to the story. For Diggs, it was kind of just that he was a late round pick, but he was like injured, and he had to deal with a lot of adversity in Maryland. But Adam Thielen, the story is he's from Mankato. He went to not from Mankato, but he went to Minnesota State Mankato, and he was able to practice on his practice field, and he made the team. This year, the story is obviously Morbo. And he's pretty much got it locked up unless he just does really, really poorly. But I think you have to make the roster, so I'm not sure. They'll probably review the Mr. Mankato requirements on a Sports Over Beers podcast or a Purple podcast at ESPN 1500 sometime soon.
Well, just going by what you said, the proclivity of the committee, the mystery select committee of Mr. Mankato to choose wide receivers and people that get a lot of buzz, I think Laquan Treadwell has to be the prohibitive favorite at this point.
It has to be a late round pick.
Fifth,
sixth, seventh, or undrafted free agent. And the 5th round pick was controversial when Stephon Diggs was selected. And I say selected, it's not like a committee. I mean, it is a committee. It's just a bunch of guys at ESPN 1500. But they choose based off of the buzz that's being generated among fans and stuff like that. So It's a responsive award. It's not like it's like a secret cabal, like, designed to just like be away from all media influence and stuff like that. It's it's responsive to like who generates buzz and stuff like that. So, yeah. So it can't be Treadwell.
So not Treadwell. Last question from Judd Zolgad's Hoodie at JZ Hoodie. Does Arif wear lifts in his shoes?
No. I just stay short.
It's true. And I think if I remember correctly, you have like a proclivity for flat shoes. Like you don't try to wear like thick soles or anything in order to enhance your apparent height.
Apparent. Yeah, well, it's not like it's not like a stated preference. I just happen to get flat shoes a lot. So, for example, the shoes I wear the most right now are the Adidas version of Converse. Basically, they're just like canvas shoes, which do not add to your height. And then the shoes I wear the second most often, my most comfortable shoes, they look like they have a thick sole, but actually your foot kind of sinks into them, which is why they're so comfortable. So they don't add that much to your height either. I do wear insoles, but it's not shoe lifts. It's just to make sure my arches don't die on me, especially when I'm at training camp.
Arch lifts.
But yeah, I don't tend to wear very tall shoes.
Well, there you go. A much more exhaustive answer for a grossly off-topic question. The kind of thing that we at Norse Code specialize in.
For sure.
Norse Code is the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. This was episode 131 with guest Matt Harmon at MattHarmon_BYB on Twitter and Instagram. Check out his website, thebackyardbanter.com, and his work on NFL.com. Feel free to check out Norse Code at our host site, dailynorseman.com. Read the rest of the SB Nation community's take on the Vikings there as well. Check out Arif's work on coldomaha.com. Some podcasts, some writing. Optimum Scouting, have you done anything for them lately? I suppose this is kind of a sleepy time for them.
Yeah, mostly I just produce a couple of articles for them every year, and it gets sometimes it ends up in the sporting news, which is kind of cool, but usually it ends up in Optimum Scouting's draft guide. So nothing for them. Most of my writing right now is like Cold Omaha. We talked about that last time and why that's the case. It's about that cheddar. But if it's more relevant to the Daily Norseman, I'll post it. Right now, I'm doing a scouting report on Willie Beavers. Difficult for me, not just because I really hate saying his name now, but also I just have to be more careful when I'm evaluating offensive linemen because I'm a little bit less comfortable evaluating them. So it's taking me a little more time to write this one. But that's sort of the next article coming up.
And, of course, you can always find Arif on the Twitter at ArifHassanNFL. Our intrepid producer, James, is at Big Mono on Twitter, and he also operates the official show Twitter account at NorseCodeDN. I'm at Dusty O'Connell, and the Facebook page for Norse Code is facebook.com/Daily Norseman. So feel free to stay in contact with us throughout the week until we get you your next fix of Norse Code. If you would like to become a sponsor of the show, go to patreon.com/Norse Code and contribute any amount you like on a recurring monthly basis, or contribute any amount you'd like once by going to paypal.me/Norse Code. That's going to do it for number 131. We'll see you next week. And until then, our formula is this: keep Teddy alive.